Hey Merit Crew, here is your ecosystems breakdown for lesson 2, which has to do with how energy moves through a system. Please remember to put all of your responses in complete sentences. I just had to give out a handful of zeros to kids who didn't follow that and didn't actually use the word in their response. So let's get started. You want complete sentences. The first word is food chain. Let's say it 3 times. Food chain, food chain, food chain. In a sentence, you might see, as an apex predator, the owl was at the top of the food chain. The definition of a food chain is a series of organisms, each dependent on the next as a source of food. So they each need the thing below it to eat. In my words, it's how energy moves through an environment. One key factor that a lot of kids miss is that the arrows represent energy. They don't represent who's eating who. They point to the thing that they give their energy to, the thing that they are getting eaten by. So in this case, the grasshopper is pointing towards the bluebird, which means that it's giving its energy to the bluebird when the bluebird eats it. That is the tricky part. So the arrows, please make sure that you know that the arrow is pointing to the flow of energy, not to the eater or the eating. Right, it's your turn. So in this food chain here with the grass, the grasshopper, the bluebird, the snake, and the owl, and then the decomposer is breaking down the owl, the blank gives energy to the blank. You should have a complete sentence. You need to use the word food chain. Go. All right, moving on. The next word is food web. Let's say the phrase 3 times. Food web, food web, food web. In a sentence, you might see, the small shrimp-like crustacean krill is central to the Antarctic food web. The definition of a food web is the overlapping food chains in an ecosystem. So basically, in my words, it's all the ways energy can move through an environment. You do not eat just one food forever, and neither do the animals in their environment. So the food web shows you the different things that can be consumed by the different things. So if you look at this food web here, you see this frog here has 4 arrows pointing towards it, meaning that it consumes 4 different things. It consumes grasshoppers, butterflies, fruit flies, and dragonflies. It's got 2 arrows pointing away from it, meaning that it's being eaten by 2 things, by pythons and by eagles. Tricky parts are that kids often confuse the food chain and the food web. What I recommend that you do is remember the word web, because if you look at a spider web, it's got a lot of different connections all over the place. So does a food web. A food web has a lot of different connections all over the place. So that could be your memory technique. Your turn. In this food web, rats give energy to both blank and blank. There are multiple correct answers. Go. All right, moving on. I hope you used a complete sentence. Next word is herbivore or herbivore. They're both appropriate. So let's say herbivore. Ready? Herbivore, herbivore, herbivore. In a sentence, you might see, the population of wild grasses was severely diminished by the increase in several populations of herbivores. The definition of a herbivore is an animal that eats predominantly plants, algae, or other producers. So they're not eating live animals, but are eating something living. Everything eats something living. Some examples of herbivores can include some types of rabbits. I've heard that jackrabbits are not herbivores, they could be omnivores. So just throwing that out there. Deer, impala, koala, zooplankton, and angelfish. And zooplankton are different than the phytoplankton that we previously mentioned in another breakdown. Zooplankton are like the little microscopic living animals of most bodies of water, while phytoplankton are the microscopic little plants of most bodies of water. The tricky parts are that a lot of kids want to argue with me that some animals accidentally sometimes eat other stuff. So for example, this bunny may accidentally eat a bug at some point. Does that make it a carnivore or an omnivore? No, it just means that most of its energy comes from plants. Its body is best at breaking down plant matter and getting energy from plant matter. So even if there are some instances when something strays from what it normally eats, overall, it gets its energy from that thing. So in this case, this bunny overall gets its energy from plant matter as an herbivore. Your turn. One herbivore that I know of is blank. Use the word in the sentence. You can use one of these, that's fine, but more importantly is a complete sentence. Go. All right. Nextosaurus is the word carnivore. Let's say it 3 times. Carnivore, carnivore, carnivore. In a sentence, you might see the carnivores of the Arctic have dramatically reduced the wild hare population. The definition of a carnivore is an animal that only eats other animals for energy. Again, remember that sometimes they stray. My cat is a carnivore. However, he occasionally will eat some of my plants. That doesn't mean that he gets energy from the plants. In fact, he often throws it up. Most of his energy, the majority of it, comes from meat. Some examples of carnivores include, but are certainly not limited to, wolves, lions, hawks, hyenas, piranhas, so some types of fish, and most types of cats, including domestic house cats. That's why I always look for a grain-free option when I'm looking for pet food, because my cat is a carnivore and does not need grain to keep him healthy, so that is just wasted space in his stomach. Again, same tricky part. Just because a house cat eats a plant does not mean that they are an omnivore. They don't get their energy from plants overall. It's your turn. One type of carnivore is you can use one of these. You can come up with one of your own. Use a complete sentence and use the word. Go. All right, moving on. Next word and final word is omnivores. You could say omnivore or omnivores. I'm just pluralized it. Let's say omnivore 3 times. Omnivore, omnivore, omnivore. In a sentence, you might see both species are omnivorous, feeding voraciously on fruits and insects. Omnivorous is the describing word that is related to omnivore. The definition of an omnivore is an animal that eats both plants and animals. To get into the Greek and Latin roots, omni means all. You may remember that we have this bar up here on your Chromebook that you type in the words is called the Omni bar. And the reason it's called the Omni bar is because you can just put in a word and it'll search on Google. It can access all of the internet. Omni in this case means that the animal eats all of the types of food. They eat both plant matter and animal matter. Some examples of omnivores include squirrels, which would eat both nuts and berries and small bugs, raccoons, who often eat minnows and small fish in addition to literally anything ever, most types of bears, orangutans, and humans. Look, it's the Merritt crew. Oh, we're omnivores. But Miss Merritt, my dad doesn't eat meat because he's a vegetarian. That means that he's a herbivore. No, your dad has the capacity to process meat, so even if he chooses not to eat meat, he is still an omnivore. Got it? I'm tired of hearing that line. All right, moving on. Finally, it's your turn. One omnivore that I know of is, make sure you use the word in a complete sentence. Go. All right, my friends, I miss you so very much. I hope to see you soon. Have a great week.